Good afternoon. My name is Mike Rosenberg. I'm a strategy professor at IESE Business School. This webinar is part of a series of webinars we've been offering from the school as a result of the virus, which is sweeping the world and causing both tremendous problems on the health front, and many people have passed away as a result of it, but also causing tremendous economic problems around the world. These different webinars have been designed to try to give people some sense of what's going on and what they can expect in the future. And now we're calling them Forging Ahead, and really our focus is shifting towards what's happening next and where are we going as a planet in terms of industry and in terms of civil society. Today, I'm really excited. We have Emmanuel Lagarrigue. He's the Executive Vice President of Schneider Electric, responsible for innovation. He's the Chief Innovation Officer of the company, a member of the executive team. Emmanuel, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mike. Hi, everyone.
And as you know, if you've been watching this series, we are live on LinkedIn, on the YouTube channel of IESE Business School, as well as La Vanguardia. This is going out. It's 4 o'clock for me here in Barcelona, but it's 10 p.m. for Emmanuel in China. You're actually based in Hong Kong, is that right?
That's correct. I'm in Hong Kong. Hi, everyone.
And Emmanuel, maybe before we get into the whole question of Schneider and its reaction to the crisis, what's going on in Hong Kong today? Because I think as this thing started to evolve, many people were worried about Hong Kong, but in fact, the island has done, the city has done very well throughout the crisis.
Yes, actually, if you look at the numbers and at the facts, it's been 1,000 cases for death. And it's been 2 weeks now without any new infection, 0 new cases. So for a city of 7 million people, so which is roughly the size of New York. So it's a pretty good performance if you just look at the numbers. And it's been done with social distancing without any sophisticated technological contact tracing app like in mainland China. Because basically you cannot do it here, but with a lot of common sense and very stringent social distancing measures on the entry into the country and in the way the life was conducted, right? So restaurants.
Well, what's it like if I fly to Hong Kong tomorrow? What happens to me?
Well, first you have to be a resident before to be allowed to board, and and when you land, you get a test. You get tested. If you test positive for COVID-19, you're immediately sent to the hospital for 2 weeks to be treated, whether you have symptoms or not. And if you tested negative, you're sent home in quarantine for 2 weeks, but with a big electronic bracelet that makes sure that you would not even leave your house, not even to buy groceries. And after 2 weeks, you can go back to life. So it's been working. There was a spike back in March, but now it's really under control. And again, 2 weeks without any new case.
Fantastic. Now, Emmanuel, you are the Chief Innovation Officer of Schneider Electric. It's a 27 billion euro company with 135,000 people all around the world. You're in lots and lots of different business units, everything to do with electricity. The motto of the company, I think, is "Life is on." So it's all about electrification. It's all about digitalization. It's lots and lots of stuff all around us are built by Schneider. How has this whole thing impacted Schneider Electric?
The first thing we saw that was interesting is that because we are a global company and we are so international and operating in 100 countries, we really saw that thing traveling from east to west as the virus was spreading and the lockdowns, and the countries were putting the populations in lockdown. So what the patterns we saw in our sales, right, in Wuhan in late January, early February, and then in Milan, late February, early March, and in Madrid, and then in New York, were exactly the same patterns, right? So you could see which product lines would go down first, and then on the way up, which product lines are recovering first. So it was, you could definitely predict, just looking at our sales, that something was going to happen. We saw the hardware.
Which product lines were they? Which were they specifically?
Everything linked to construction. So we do power systems and automation for 5 segments, right? So buildings, homes, data centers, infrastructures and industrial manufacturing. So everything linked to construction and buildings was usually the first thing that was going down first. And then when there were factory shutdowns, automation was going away also, but not the case for food and bev, and there were variation depending on the type of verticals inside manufacturing. And then on the way up, definitely there's a strong need, and it's probably a durable trend strongly for automation. Automation is the first business that goes back up.
Automation goes up because people realize that if they automate, they don't need the people, and if people get sick, it's okay.
Yeah, that's in the.
It's kind of tough. That
yes, until 3 months ago, you would automate your process or your building for productivity. Now you do it for resiliency, and yeah, you still try to reduce the number of people to automate jobs away, quote unquote. If we say it very crudely and very, very harshly. That was for productivity. Now you do it for resiliency.
By the way, if you haven't been following this series, if you do have a question, please use the chat function on LinkedIn or on YouTube. And Sabrina Voss, my colleague, she will be watching the chat very carefully, and she will type your questions on a separate application, and they will magically appear for me here on this iPad. So if you have questions for Emmanuel, please don't hesitate to use the chat feature on either YouTube or LinkedIn. Emmanuel, you mentioned resiliency, and you and I have worked together on a number of different projects between IESE and Schneider Electric over the years. I know you've got some policies in the company which perhaps makes you more resilient than others. So one of the things which has always struck me is that Schneider has, from a supply chain perspective, 2 suppliers of pretty much everything you make and everything you buy. Is that true? And how has that played out in this crisis?
Yeah, that's true. Our supply chain is organized regionally. We have very few flows that go from continent to continent. And when we have had issues in the past because of a new tariff showing up, popping up, or an outbreak, it was very easy to remove those intercontinental flows and have our supply chains operate regionally. So that was a factor of resilience. We have had cases where we had to stop manufacturing plant, either because it was the law in the country where that manufacturing plant was, or because we were not in conditions of having our people working in safe conditions with the right PPE and the right social distancing measures and everything. So, but for instance, we had one of our plants in Mexico that was we had to stop for 3 weeks, and we managed. And that plant was supplying most of North America, the US, Canada, and Mexico. While that plant was stopped, we managed to supply the North American market from the Philippines with another plant that was producing the same product. So, and we had that case several times. So that was interesting. So that during the lockdown in China, we were producing for China from the outside. We were importing into China, and then China, we reversed the flows very quickly, because at the end our plants in China were closed for no more than 3 weeks. I mean, the Wuhan plant was closed for much longer, but and we were pretty flexible. But operating regionally was definitely a factor of resiliency.
And then from an organizational point of view, you also have kind of a matrix structure at Schneider with different heads of the different vertical businesses, also different heads of different product categories, and then you also have a regional organization in place. How did that matrix structure work during the crisis as this thing rolled around the world?
Well, when early March, when we understood that this was going to be much more global than just a regional Asian or Chinese problem, and that lockdowns and governments were going to act slightly differently, and that anyway that the phasing of the outbreaks and the lockdowns was going to be different. We said we just had one guideline for everyone, which is that the country presidents would be in charge, right? So everybody had to follow whatever the country president would decide on a given territory. And for example, I have a global team. My team is spread between the US, Israel, France, Spain, the UK, the Nordics. So I have people everywhere, and I had to follow the rules that each one of the country presidents would apply, which were, well, in turn, following the local government's recommendations. And of course, for a global team, it was a bit sometimes difficult to manage, but that was the most efficient way, and definitely also another factor for resiliency.
So at the edge, it was about the local business, the local supply chain, and making decisions as close as you can to the ground, I guess, in each situation.
And this is the type of, and I think it's something that you highlighted in your book. No, that's right. I mean, having a country president, having someone, a senior executive that is local and that can understand the local situation, read the weak signals, and whose job is really about this, about representing the company on the ground, and also taking these type of actions and measures for all the employees on the territory was really a factor of resiliency for us here. And whereas many companies have had that temptation of removing those roles because they may not look as productive as others, and then you appoint the head of this or that factory as the legal representative of your company, but his real job is to be the head of a factory or the head of a commercial operation, not the country president. So the fact that we kept that country president figure was definitely a plus, an upside here in this crisis.
Yeah, you need it in the bad times, because in the good times it's so tempting to remove that entire layer of management, and that can be dangerous, especially in complicated times. So how is Schneider seeing the ramp up? I mean, the world is getting back. Here in outside of Barcelona, where I live, we're in phase 1 of a 4-phase get back to life mode. As do you see things kind of opening up? I guess China's back. I think you mentioned to me that you were speaking to the president of China, and business is good in China.
Business is good. I spoke with our Chinese country president. When was that? Last Friday. He was traveling. He was getting off a plane, and he was like, "Gee, wow, that plane was packed, was full." In China,
from where to where? Where was he going?
He was flying from Shanghai to Chongqing, someplace. But so he's not flying internationally. He's just flying within China, but it was back to normal with a lot of PPEs everywhere at the airport and wearing masks and contact tracing and all these type of things. But back to normal. And to be honest, our business in China right now is back, and we're even growing. I mean, there is a strong rebound effect after 2 very difficult months. Now we are way above even the activity level we had a year ago in China. So this is the first place where we see and feel that rebound, and we have good hopes that we should see that now in Europe in June, and later in the US. Although in the US we didn't experience the same drop as in Europe or in China, because we are supplying a lot of equipment to hospitals and data centers to keep them on, right? To keep them the lights on in those places. So, and this has been a very active part of the market. Another interesting thing in the US, in the US there was this trend of urbanization that started probably 10, 12 years ago, where people were leaving the suburbs to come back to go to the cities. In the last 2 months, that trend has reversed, right? So that people are like, well, next time I don't want to be caught in a 70 square meter apartment in downtown Manhattan. I'd rather be outside in a place where I can have a garden and even a swimming pool, if I can afford it. And anyway, because from now on, I'll only go to the office twice a week. Well, I'll take the 1 hour and a half commute. So I'm back to the suburbs, and we really see that in our numbers, right? We see that was one of the big surprises of during this crisis, seeing that's very strong activity in the residential market.
I've got one more question from me, but then we've got about 12 or 15 coming in from the LinkedIn thing. So I want to get to them relatively quickly. As we get into a new normal, or as we get out of this thing, you know, you live in Hong Kong, you see people with masks, you see people with a different kind of behavior. You've got some data coming in from different places. What do you think this thing is going to leave? What do you think the world's going to look like as we get out of this whole mess? I mean, one very specific area is, Schneider is kind enough to be the sponsor of our center on sustainability,
Yeah.
which my colleague Pascal Barone runs. And I know that you have a fundamental focus on digitalization and a transition to a low carbon economy as kind of a corporate, beyond corporate strategies. That's almost a corporate philosophy.
Yeah.
How do you see this stuff coming as a result of this digitalization? Everybody says has gone forward in sustainability. I had a lady on the Punjab on a Zoom call. She can see the Himalayas for the first time in her life. She's about 27, and her grandmother says, no, this is what it used to look like, but she only remembers hazy skies. What do you think is going to happen as a result of this thing? Where are we going as a planet, as a people, and are there regional differences? And what do you think?
Well, the honest answer is that it's too early to tell, but I see three trends which are shaping up. The first one is we're probably getting into a decade of resiliency. The last decade was a decade of efficiency, right? It came from a deep financial crisis that turned into an economic crisis. The only way to crank up the system was to flush the banks and the system with a lot of cash. But that was a decade where you would scrub 200 basis points in your P&L and reduce the cost of your product. That was the era of productivity, and you were a hero if you were doing this. Even if you were designing a supply chain where you have a part of your product being built in Bangladesh, another part in Vietnam, you assemble the whole thing in China to sell it in Switzerland. As long as you would save money, that was good. Now, you cannot do that anymore. If you want to sell it in Switzerland, well, you better produce it in Europe, even if it's going to cost 10% more. So resiliency is going to trump efficiency. That's probably and it's resiliency of supply chains, resiliency of IT systems. So cybersecurity is on the rise. Resiliency of the energy systems, right? So California, for instance, in the Bay Area, they have started the shutdowns, the power shutoffs 2 weeks ago, right? So they forced people who were in lockdown, they were in that stay-at-home order, they had to leave their house because they didn't have power. The electric system cannot fail. People have to have power. So it's resiliency is going probably to be a big.
And by the way, the power outages in California, this is because of the aging infrastructure, the old grid running through the forests. The forests catch on fire, so they have to sometimes shut down the power lines in order to reduce the risk of forest fires. This happened to my mother, who lives in Northern California, last year, and exactly. I know that PG&E is technically bankrupt because they were held responsible for this fire, which wiped out Paradise, California, about 2 years ago. So that's an example of the kind of stuff which has got to get more resilient.
Exactly. So resiliency. Second thing is a lot of people are talking about the end of globalization. I probably would call it a new tweak on globalization. For sure, physical supply chains, if your business is about something physical, if you have a hotel, a restaurant, a service, or if you build a physical product, your supply chain is going to be local, regional. It will have to be more resilient, and you will try to source everything you can locally. Right. So that was the other day on a Zoom call with a lot of very important people from the European Commission. We are talking about how we manage the flow of lithium-ion batteries for cars and other applications into Europe. So the idea is to manufacture the batteries in Europe, of course, but not only that, also to be able to source the lithium from Europe, so from Spain in that case, and avoid having to import it from South America, Africa, or Australia. So very local supply chains. That may also be helped sometimes by the rise of populism, or that may entail the rise of populism. So that's another debate. But deglobalization of physical supply chains, and whereas we may see a hyper globalization of everything digital, with just this big divide between China and the US when it comes to everything digital. But apart from this, and we see that one of the winners in that game are the big tech companies. So now, depending on how they behave, they will earn their stripes of heroes, or there may be a backlash. But regardless, we can bet on something, on a super globalization of everything that can be done digitally. And then the last one, yes, it's an acceleration of many things, of many good things and many bad things. So an acceleration of remote working, an acceleration of telemedicine, probably an acceleration in the consciousness that climate change is important, and if you want to have a resilient and local supply chain, you better think circular economy from the get-go, and have that supply chain sustainable, because if it's not sustainable, it's not going to be resilient. So all this goes together. So there's a fast forward of many good things, and there's also a fast forward probably of a few bad things, like I don't know, the debt levels we are accumulating in many rich countries and not so rich countries. The question of the fiscal union of in Europe, and how fast the European Union is able to react this time, and without waiting for 5 years or not, and this type of thing. So that's so resiliency, new twist on globalization, and fast forward on many good things and not so good things.
Speaking about resilience, I want to go to some of these questions and kind of give them in a different order than they were asked. But a very specific question: Does Schneider have a plan B, a contingency for the virus coming back, or
Yes.
a mutation coming back? And in the fall, I mean, they talk about in the Spanish flu there was a second wave, and there is talk that maybe there will be a second wave of this thing, or in some way. Do you guys have a plan for that?
Yeah, and the plan is always about the same thing, and that's the same principles we applied during the first wave. Protecting our people, making sure that if they have to work on our premises, they work in safe conditions and serving our customers, especially when our customers are hospitals or data centers, right? So we and basically that worked in the first wave. So putting the local organization in the front line and follow their decisions, empowering the supply chain people, and even this time with probably more redundancies and more resiliency in our supply chain, because there were a few hiccups that we managed to go through, but next time we want to avoid them. Yeah, so we are prepared. I think these business continuity plans that everybody has built or reinforced during this crisis are now ready to go for a second wave in most companies, I would say.
Emmanuel, there's about 6 or 7 different questions about innovation. Now, you are the CIO of Schneider. Maybe you can just explain to everybody. You know, I think you cover 4 or 5 different areas in that role. It's a little bit complicated even for me to understand. But then the questions are: Is this thing going to accelerate innovation? Are big companies going to play it safe? Is this going to change the innovation paradigm as you see it?
I don't think it's going to change the innovation paradigm, because it's inherently linked to the, I would say, the universal laws of capitalism and the creative destruction that Schumpeter wrote about like 80 years ago. So that's not going to change with the crisis. Not the fundamentals of why we should innovate and the innovator's dilemma and all those principles we all know. And of course, we'll see things accelerating, because in this fast forward trend, there is a fast forward of many things. So what I see, for instance, is the Israeli ecosystem of innovation, which is they are really really on a roll these days. They have used a lot of the technologies that Israel produces to keep their hospital system up and running. And now they're deploying this, and so contact tracing without invading the privacy of people, because this is what we are going to need, right? So how do you check the temperature of people? How do you check that people wear their mask in a public place, because that's about the safety of the others, but
Because
without
you use machine vision and you do things like that, right?
Yeah, machine vision, but without invading the privacy of the people, right? So and this is possible, right? So you see all those technologies being accelerated. Cybersecurity, because during this crisis there were a lot of cybersecurity attacks, and this is something which is globalizing very, very fast. So there will be more cybersecurity. So a lot of innovations. We did. We had an interesting experiment that we were conducting in Australia. Around the adoption of solar panels, so home solar and home storage. While people basically are staying at home, they realize that this year, well, vacations will be at home, so they start investing in the house. Plus, they start to worry about that resiliency issue in places like California, like Australia, and other places where the electrical grid is starting to fail. So they are ready to invest in a solar home system or in a storage system for the house. So you see, but it has to be done in a sustainable way with something that also makes sense for economically for the customer. So you see a lot of trends that are accelerating, and definitely, for instance, our venture team had to reprioritize a little bit their priorities and the topics they were working on, but not that much. It was not a completely 360-degree turn. Just putting a bit more emphasis on some topics, a bit less on others. But there is no topic that you would say no, it's over. Maybe because
if it's not impolite, are you putting more money into those ventures or less money into those ventures? If it's too impolite, don't answer the question.
Yeah, no. So the answer is more in the long run. In the short term, like every company, we are very careful with the cash out because we don't know how long this will be. So we have been very cautious. And the first thing you do in ventures, you want to help your entrepreneurs stay afloat. Where there is a government help, because those are small, medium-sized enterprise, you help them get those public help, or you bail them out a bit. This is what you dedicate your money to in this crisis. But in the long run, there will be more, because we see an acceleration in all the topics we deal with now. It's true that we are working a lot on digital transformations of businesses, sustainability, resiliency of energy. So those are topics that are probably here to stay.
Eco mobility.
Eco mobility is one of them. Yeah.
And then microgrids. Yeah. What on microgrids and on this whole transformation of the energy system? What innovations do you see? Where do you see energy going over the next, I don't know, 5 or 20 years?
Well, in energy, the fact is that we are going to continue using electricity. We've seen that during the lockdowns and this crisis, where the consumption of electricity has not declined. Because we were basically consuming the same thing, but from our houses instead of from our offices and factories in most countries, except maybe India and Indonesia. In most countries, every industrial company was able to keep their factory open after a couple of weeks, probably of shutdown. So the energy consumption has not declined. So and if you look at the trends, because we are all hungry for more digitization, more comfort, more electrification of processes, among them transportation, we are going to in the next 20 years, we are going to double the consumption of electricity. And there is no way we can produce twice as much electricity with the current system, with a grid and a centralized system and producing electricity with fossil fuels. No way. It's not feasible from an economical standpoint. It doesn't make sense economically. And it's terrible from a sustainability standpoint. So what we see is a decentralization and decarbonization of energy. This is why microgrids are very important. More and more companies and households are asking for their own energy system based on renewables and storage. So microgrids, systems that would produce electricity for themselves. That if they have too much of it, they can sell it to the neighbors or give it away.
So this could be a house, a neighborhood, an airport, an industrial park, even a city.
Exactly, exactly. And we see that trend being durable. And again, one of the big factors here is cost and decarbonization, of course, but also resiliency. Right? So you get resiliency no matter what happens to the grid. You know you're going to have energy because energy is critical.
And the low price of oil. We have a specific question from someone. You know, the oil price has gone to $20 a barrel, more or less. It was even negative for a couple of days, where the traders were trying to get rid of oil, which they couldn't sell. Does that change this equation? Does it? Because you talk about fast forward and maybe a low price of oil, some would say, is going to delay some of those investments.
Yeah, that may delay them by a couple of years in some countries, maybe in the US, depending on the short-term political context. I would say, but everywhere else, it's going to be. Look, I was talking the other day with a Spanish company who is today the largest developer of renewable assets, right? So wind farms and solar farms. And I was asking him that question. Hey, what do you think? And his point was, no, I see it accelerating because today the oil and gas companies have understood that with that price of oil at $20 or very low, it may be better to invest in deploying and developing solar farms and wind farms than exploration, than oil fields. So he was saying, well, now I have new competitors. So the price of renewable electricity is going to go down and it's going to spread much faster. So that was his point. So because of the price of oil, because oil and gas companies are disincentivized from investing in their core business and are going to go straight at this, he was seeing an acceleration. And then you have the stimulus packages that will come up. So China has already announced that they want to invest in what they call the new infrastructures. So that's 5G, but that's also electrification of vehicles, more charging infrastructures to make sure that the entire fleet of vehicles in China becomes electric faster. We don't know about Europe, but it's very likely that Europe will go in that sense. They will try to incentivize and help the automotive sector because it's creating a lot of jobs. And they will try to push for more EVs, for more electrification of transportation. And at the same time, if you think about it, and we had many conversations with the European Union, and again, we don't know yet exactly what those 500 billions would be applied to, but for all those jobs, so if you want to reconvert all those the jobs that have been lost in tourism, in hospitality, in restaurants, that are not going to come back that fast. Reconverting those people in healthcare workers, that's going to take time. It's not that obvious, but creating green jobs, that's much easier.
A new Green Deal, as they call it in the States.
Exactly. So that may happen in Europe, actually. So again, in the short term in the US, with the current federal administration, the energy transition may go backward, but in the US, never discount the states, the cities, and the business community, which has understood that the energy transition is not an option, and it's not going backward anyway.
Emmanuel, we got a bunch of questions on innovation and partnerships. Innovation on supply chains. Do you work with your suppliers on innovation? Innovation, partnering with other firms, with other companies. What's your view on innovation and partnerships?
Look, the way we organize innovation, we have two types of innovation. We have what we call innovation at the core. That's the incremental innovation. That's R&D. That's the innovation you need to be the best-in-class company in your industry, to beat your competitor, to create competitive advantages against the competitors in business models So this is R&D. This is the traditional in innovation, and this is the first order of business. And then we have what we call innovation at the edge. This is disruptive innovation. This is about thinking what's next. What are the next business models I need to play in and what is the next business portfolio of my company? And this has to be done at the edge, that is in partnerships with entrepreneurs, with universities, with venture capitalists, with other companies. So it's all about partnerships because it's impossible for a large company to create the disruption from within. I mean, it's physically impossible. The resource allocation system, the people, the incentives, everything is geared towards maintaining and the current system. So disrupting it is extremely difficult. So you need partnerships. We've done partnerships with companies like with oil and gas companies, which are hungry to go for a more sustainable world. They have understood, they have turned the corner. They also want to understand what that's made of. With private equity companies, right? We have that big joint venture with Carlyle, the infrastructure fund of Carlyle. So if you think about it, if you're private equity and invest in infrastructures, it's not a natural game because private equities are not there to hold an asset for a very long period of time, or they are not ready to get those low single-digit yield that normally an infrastructure would give you. So they want more upside and a faster rotation of assets. So the reflection and the thinking with Carlyle was, well, if we inject technology and sustainability in those infrastructure, if we make those infrastructure more sustainable, we will increase the value because there's a premium on sustainability and resiliency and efficiency. So that increases the value, and you can rotate the asset faster. So this is what we're doing right now at JFK Airport in New York, right? So we are going to make it the airport that New York deserves, one of the most sustainable airports in the world, automated, producing its own energy, safe from the old security, I would say the old from 3 months ago security paradigm, but also the new ones, right? So contact tracing, social distancing in the airport when you board and when you deplane at the airport. All this using technology to make sure that you increase the performance and the value of the asset. So partnerships are really key. Yeah.
Well, where does the customer fit in innovation at the core and innovation at the edge? Because if you're going to Israel to talk to cool startups and you're got your guys in the R&D lab, where's the customer? Now, I've been to one of your innovation days where you bring the customers to see cool stuff, but how does the voice of the customer play out in this?
Well, I think both at the core and at the edge, here the voice of the customer is similar. At the edge, you work a bit more on the unmet and unexpressed needs, right? So the customer will never tell you what he or she needs. So you have to guess it or through indirect.
They won't tell you because they don't want to tell you, or because they don't even know.
They don't even know, right? So that's so you have to work, and when you work at the edge and in disruptive innovation, you don't even know who are going to be the alternatives, right? So who are going to be your competitors, and all the technologies you're going to compete with, or that are going to be available. So it's a bit more of an uncertain world, but the voice of the customer is always the first thing you do. At the core, it's a bit. It's a bit easier because you know who the customers are, you know where their needs up to now, and you know what are the alternatives, who are the competitors. So, but yeah, the voice of the customer is important from in all those processes of innovation, of course.
Now changing gears a little bit, there's a couple of questions about different parts of the world, because they've said that this is going to be the century of Asia. In another context, I've made a speech about, is Africa the new China? There's a specific question about how you feel, Africa will emerge from this crisis, how you feel Asia will emerge from this crisis, and are we looking for a new balance of power in the world? I'll remind people who may not know this that you and Pascal, your CEO, moved to Hong Kong back in 2011. Moving the center of gravity of Schneider Electric from Paris to Hong Kong way back then. What do you think is going to be the future of the world, and how will Africa and Asia evolve with respect to North America, Latin America, and Europe?
Well, and we did that back then. Because today Asia is 45% of our revenue, right? So our first country of operation is the US, our second is China. But if you take Asia as a whole, this is 45% of our revenue. And it's clear that if the next generation of leaders of the company are not born in Asia, or if at least a part of the next iteration of the executive committee of the company is not made of Asian people, we will never understand well the company. So the best way to do that was to transfer the part of the corporate office to Asia, and to say, well, you know what, the corporate, because if you're a young Asian talent coming out of the best engineering schools in India or MBA or business schools in China, why would you go work in Europe or in the US? You have all the growth and all the very exciting companies around you. So why would you bother? So we brought those jobs to make sure that we would attract talent and also stay close to where the action was. It was also responding to a trend of well, we are a global company, so and we were convinced at the time that having one headquarter was not going to be productive, right? It's very easy if there is one headquarter to reinvent the world from the water cooler and from behind his desk, because everything is around, right? So if the executive team is scattered around the planet, that's a bit more difficult, and you make sure that all your executives and all your leaders are more grounded, right? So I moved to Hong Kong at that time. I stayed for 2 years, and then I moved to the US, stayed in the US for 5 years, got back to Hong Kong. This is a normal thing, and you operate virtually with a virtual team. But this is how business is
so you guys Zoom, you guys were Zooming along happily, probably WebExing along happily before all this stuff happened.
Yeah, this has not really changed for us. Yeah, so the only thing is that we were meeting face to face once a quarter. Well, last time we met was in January, face to face. But we have Zoom was already part of our.
I think the 15 members that you guys are in Zurich, Hong Kong, and Boston.
Yeah, Zurich, Hong Kong, and Boston mostly. There's one guy in Dubai. This is where we are scattered. So the future, it's difficult to see where the center of gravity of the next in the next phase will be. Frankly speaking, I don't know. And will this pandemic and those lockdowns impact the movement? It's too early to tell. There is a very good video that was published by the Financial Times today on this. And I won't spoil the conclusion of that video, but it's exactly about that point. Will the center of gravity change after this? It's clear that from a demographic standpoint, Asia is going to be the largest economic power. Now, if Asia is more or less fragmented, if China plays, depending on how China plays within Asia and outside of Asia, that may change. What that pandemic can change is who discovers the vaccine first, and how nationalistic that country or that region behaves. Right? So think about if the vaccine is discovered first in China or first in the US or first in Europe, and how those governments will play. Will they keep the vaccine for their people first, or will they share? Will it be globalized? So that may impact a bit those trends and reinforce or accelerate some of those deglobalization trends and fragmentation of the world. Now, is it durable? Is it really a long-term trend? I think it's way too early to tell.
You mentioned talent, Emmanuel. There's a question earlier about talent management, and just as a side, in one of the workshops we're doing with CEOs and the dean, one of the CEOs said that he had discovered talent he didn't even know he had. That this crisis has kind of unlocked the structures and allowed some people to emerge. Have you seen that in Schneider? Have you seen people pop up out of nowhere who can do amazing things, or what's your experience on that?
Yes, definitely yes. So there, in this type of in this crisis, with everybody grounded, everybody on the same foot, because even if we have abolished the notion of a headquarter, you still have corporate function. You still have people who are closer to the boss, and people who are farther from the boss or from the bosses, even if the bosses are scattered around the planet. So what we saw, and I've shared that with other executives in other companies, you see a more balanced way to manage. So yeah, you discover talent, and people are more on an equal foot. So if you're in a remote region, well, you're in the same conditions that if you are close to the center of gravity of decisions. So this is one phenomenon. And then the other thing, that because we have empowered our countries, we say, hey, from day one, whatever the country decides, we follow. So people were empowered, and people who were normally asked to execute a strategy that was designed on the other side of the matrix and be good caretakers of the P&L were in power, and had a lot of power all of a sudden in a very critical situation where they had to be very creative, react extremely fast under a lot of pressure, and also with a personal concern, right? So in countries where well, they could themselves be, and we had a number of our country presidents who have gone through the COVID-19 themselves, and many of our people also. So this is where you see the true colors of a leader under this type of pressure. It cannot go for too long because it creates a lot of stress also. But yeah, you discover talent. Yeah.
And some companies have been engaging with the community, doing a lot of stuff, doing extra stuff, making stuff that they didn't used to make. Has Schneider in different parts of the world had kind of a community outreach component to this whole crisis? Has that been part of the story? And if it has, do you know anything about the benefits or the impact?
Yeah, but we have kept very discreet about it. We have refrained from communicating outside of the company. We have communicated heavily within the company because we were all proud of what the company was doing. Well, basically, the short story is that we have supplied tons of electrical equipment and power systems to hospitals around the world, starting from Wuhan. Those 2 hospitals that were built in 2 weeks. Well, you had to bring electricity to the hospitals and bring power. That's an example. And then in Milan, and in New York, and in Madrid, and in Barcelona, everywhere we did that. And also repurposing our supply chain to ship masks and PPE from China to Europe and to North America, or repurposing our 3D printing facilities in Madrid, for instance, to print face shields for health workers and things like this. But again, I think this is, of course, we have always been very conscious of our responsibility as a large company with the community, and as you know, sustainability is a core part of our strategy. But I think what we did is, yeah, there were some heroic things, because when they called you on a Saturday afternoon and the hospital is going to have an issue that night if we don't change a transformer or change electrical equipment before 10 p.m., and you do it and you make it, and a job that would normally take a week to build, you do it in 6 hours. This is heroic. Now, this is also normal, right? So in such a situation, you would not expect less from any company.
No, but Emmanuel, if I heard you right, you said you've done a lot to tell each other about the stuff you're doing in different places, but you've been very low profile in telling the world. Yes. Why spend a lot of time telling each other, and why not spend more time telling the world?
Well, because we felt proud. We felt proud to belong to this company, and we felt proud also. It was good to recognize people who were leaving the family behind to work hard in building equipment and supplying, or going to hospitals to make sure that the lights would stay on, or keeping data centers that we have been all using from during the keeping data centers up and running. So we were proud for our colleagues and the risks they were taking in doing this. Now, we didn't feel it was right use to say that externally. And to leverage the prices for any marketing type of marketing purpose. So this is why we refrain from saying that outside.
Emmanuel Lagarrigue, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a story of resilience. It's a story of a global business, and a story of this tremendous amount of discretion and good common sense, which I think we all need more of in the world today. So thank you very much for joining us, Emmanuel.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Now, for all of you, be sure to join us next week as we continue this series. We've got Rolf Haben-Janssen, the CEO of Hapag-Lloyd, the third largest shipping company in the world, on Tuesday. And on Thursday in Spanish, we'll have my colleagues Alfredo Pastor and John Enrique Ricard talking about how to build a more just and fair society as we come out of this crisis. I remind you that this broadcast is available on LinkedIn. It's taped. You can also watch it on the YouTube channel of IESE Business School and La Vanguardia. Thanks very much for joining us this afternoon if you're in Europe, this morning if you're in North America. And Emmanuel, thanks so much. It's very late at night, and I really appreciate you making the time for us. I hope you don't have any more conference calls tonight, and you can just enjoy your family and get some sleep.
Thank you.
Okay, good night, everybody.